reform, back to Thoreau and Walton. Moral reform is the effort to throw off sleep. Why is it that men give so poor an account of their day if they have not been slumbering? They're not such poor calculators. If they had not been overcome with drowsiness, they would have performed something. The millions are awake enough for physical labor, but only 1 in a million is awake enough for effective intellectual exertion. Only 1 in 100 millions to a poetic or divine life. And then, obviously Whitman knew these lines. To be awake is to be alive. I've never yet met a man who was quite awake. How could I have looked him in the face? And then, of course, the lines we love to quote. We must learn to reawaken and to keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn which does not forsake us in our soundest sleep. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability for a man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor. It is something to be able to paint a particular picture or to carve a statue or so to make a few objects beautiful. It's far more glorious to carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look, which morally we can do to affect the quality of the day. That is the highest of arts. Every man is tasked to make his life, even in its details, worthy of the contemplation of his most elevated and critical hour. If we refused, or rather used up such paltry information as we get, the oracles would distinctly inform us how this might be done. I went to the woods because I wish to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and to see if I could not learn what it had to teach. And not when I came to die discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put it to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath, shade close, to drive life into a corner, reduce it to its lowest terms. Wow. So, I mean, it's brilliant. It is truly brilliant, the ways in which Whitman will borrow from Thoreau and play the game himself. He says it again, the feeling of health, the full noon trill, the song of me rising from bed and meeting the sun. Of course, this meeting the sun will be symbolic for, no doubt, for Whitman, the ways in which he will play games with this idea of awakening, meeting, contact, meeting, right? Later it will be adhesiveness that will play the same kind of game, right? And then, interestingly, we're going to get some rhetorical questions. Now, we saw this already, again, back to echoes. We saw this already in earlier poems where he loves to ask questions directly of you, the reader. It becomes very intimate, very, very close. Have you reckoned, he asked, and of course that's a very American, especially as it becomes the alighted verb that it is. Have you reckoned 1,000 acres much? We immediately think of Tolstoy's How Much Land Does a Man Need, right? Have you reckoned 1,000 acres much? Have you reckoned the earth much? Have you practiced so long to read? Have you felt so proud to get at the meaning of poems? It's as if he's speaking right past the academics of his day, right to the real readers, the people he wanted to talk to. And he asks those questions directly even to us, of course. Think about it. I mean, what's more important? To know how to read well and to care about it, or to be a millionaire? Most people will say, are you an idiot? A millionaire, of course, because we live in a capitalist society. You gotta have lots of money to survive. And Whitman's like, man, I'm not so sure about that. What would it mean if you had all the land in the world, but then you couldn't enjoy your life? How long does it take you to learn how to read? Now, of course, there it is, right? I mean, we love Mortimer Adler's How to Read a Book because he is one of those geniuses who will say, learn how to read. Dude, I already know how to read. No. You think you know how to read. Learn how to read. That's why we pick up the great books and we read it. Well, yeah, but the great books, that's very controversial. Wait. We are the stories that we tell and retell. We are the stories we accept. We're also the stories we decide to reject, but we make a promise in 303. We don't reject stories until we've learned and read those stories. Sometimes we're going to be shocked that what we read is not what somebody told us about that story at all. As, of course, you're familiar with. You play video games. No, don't play that game. That game stinks. You try it, you love it. Happens in reading as well. Takes a long time, though, to learn how to read, but learning how to read well, that's a different thing. And then notice the last one. Have you felt so proud? And we're back, of course, again to the line, shut not your doors, right? That is to say, those well-filled shelves, right, and all of that. Are you not so proud? Have you felt so proud at getting at the meaning of poems. It's almost as if Whitman's aware that he's going to have people who are going to try to critique harshly what he's writing. And so he's going to step right out of the pages and say to them, you might want to back up a little bit here. What is it that Emily Dickinson says so beautiful to the reader? Judge tenderly of me. In other words, there's this sense that before you jump to too much conclusion, you might want to think again. Again, obviously, the fallibilist position epistemologically is the one that we're playing with. And then he uses the word stop. Now, I would say this, if you have the ability of an online or digitized version of Leaves of Grass, just go ahead and just put in there for your search engine the word stop, and take a look at how few times it actually gets used in Leaves of Grass. Why? Because Leaves of Grass is about flowing. It's about movement. So when you see the word stop, it's always a fascinating kind of use of the word. Notice here, stop this day and night with me. Of course, day and night, I mean, it all of a sudden it calls on old titles, and obviously, why do you say night? Why didn't you just say day? I mean, stop this day and night with me, and you shall possess. Watch how he uses this word possession. You're going to see it twice now. Possess the origin of all poems. There it is. Genesis. We're at the beginning of Song of Myself. In 1855, we were at the beginning of Leaves of Grass. And it's all about the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Of course, Whitman loved his 1611 King James Bible, and he loved to quote it. And he's playing games here. In other words, you want to know where everything comes from? You want to know what the source is? Omnes. Omnes, he will say in earlier lines that we've studied already, right? He says, I'll tell you about origins. I'll tell you where it all comes from, right? And he says, all poems. In other words, he's assuming the idea that Leaves of Grass will become for him, and Song of Myself ultimately, the fruition of everything. And that's why we have so many growing metaphors, right? He says, notice 4 U's in a row to finish this poem. You shall possess the good of the earth and the sun. I'm sorry, not the sun, sun. There are millions of suns left, S-U-N-S. Now I want to borrow really quickly from our Nortons to just hear this information. We're told Walt Whitman was stirred by astronomical immensity, and his grasp of solar data was advanced for his age. He was probably influenced by the New York lectures of the Cincinnati astronomer Ormsby McKnight Mitchell in December of 1847. Now, we have more information here from Joseph Beaver, Walt Whitman, poet of science from 1951, and lots of other researchers have pointed out the ways in which Whitman was very influenced by the science that was happening of his day. We mentioned about atoms earlier. Later it will be the learned astronomer. But notice here, he'll make just a reference in a parenthetic. There are millions of suns left. That's an interesting phrase of its own, because of course, the idea is that there's lots that we don't know that's way out there, epistemological fallibilism. And so a little bit of humility, notice the word proud, might make some sense. What is it that T.S. Eliot will tell us in East Coker? The only wisdom we can hope to acquire is the wisdom of humility. Humility is endless, and we're certainly playing that game here. In other words, what is it that he's saying? Well, when you go to nature, it's a whole lot different from going to some book on a shelf. You might learn a little humility and not be so proud. You might back away from your complete absolutisms epistemologically. And you might begin to ask some questions about your ontological relationship. Who are you? And of course that will lead to studies of psychology and sociology. Now I'm listing our big 5 obviously, with maybe a new rendering and an understanding of the question of theodicy and the pain and suffering in the world. You shall no longer take things, he says it this way, at second or third hand. There were people who would say, you don't want to read Leaves of Grass. I mean, it's obscene, it's disgusting, it's pornographic. And he's saying to those readers, the skeptic readers, we saw this many times in our previous readings as well. Just give me a chance. Just give me a chance. You kind of get that sense, right? That is to say, you'll no longer take things at second or third hand, nor look through the eyes of the dead. What an amazing way to talk about. We've said this, the new is the new, the N-E-W is the K-N-E-W, but he says, you got to look through the eyes of the dead, nor feed, it's very interesting word picture given Francis Bacon's of Studies, which, you know, obviously Whitman would have known, on the specters, ghosts, in books. In other words, it's not that books are bad, it's not that old stuff is bad, it's not that the great books or the classics are bad, but you got to find ways to live through them and beyond them. That is to say, we got to read the Iliad so that we can read Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, if you will, as we've said many times in our discussions together. Everything builds on earlier kinds of projects, and we want to respect that, right? Notice, you shall not, earlier it was you shall no longer, you shall not look through my eyes either. This is amazing, because you'll remember what he said for what I assume about myself. You shall assume. But notice here he says, no. This is the destroy the teacher idea from passage 46-47 that we're going to get to later. You shall not look through my eyes either, nor take things from me. In other words, don't just accept them because I'm telling you to. You shall listen. Now, I've been asked recently, why are you giving these lectures? And I argue, well, first of all, they're just amazing poetry that we all need to enjoy. What else are we going to read when we go for a walk to the park or to the mountains or downtown or riding on the subway? But then I think there's another argument, and it's right here. We got to learn how to listen. Listen to how he says this, no pun intended. You shall listen to all sides and filter them from yourself. By the way, notice it's not for yourself, it's from yourself. Notice his intentional language here. By the way, the word yourself was actually one word in the 1855 edition, and now notice it's divided without a hyphen. So it's your, and then it's the word self. He's playing philosophic games with us when he does this, and I'll get to it later to kind of help you to explain it. By the way, did you notice the word filter there and how important that is? What is it that he says? Well, we're going to get there in passage 46. You're asking me questions. I hear you. I answer. I cannot answer. You must find out for yourself. That's what he says in passage 46-47. It is compelling that we're already setting ourselves up here for this kind of an idea. It is genius the way that he begins with perfumes and he ends with you. And he says in the end, I don't want you to just take it from me. And as I said to you guys as I began these series of talks with Walt, don't just hear it from me that I say this is amazing poetry. I'm trying to obviously show you how amazing it is, but in the end you get to decide. Notice, listen to all sides. And this is, of course, going to take us ultimately to a 3B question. Why is that so hard today? Surely we can listen to all sides of a discussion. If you find yourself in a moment where you do not want to hear what the person on the other side politically has to say, you're in trouble. That's what Whitman's telling you. You're in trouble. You need the other side's positions expressed and understood. No, I do not, because I already know that's complete garbage. Whoa. First of all, it may be complete garbage, but you still need to show the respect to listen to all sides. Where do I learn how to do that better? Whitman's going to say, follow my poems. You're going to learn how to filter all the way through this study, and I hope that's happening for you. Well, quickly now at 2A. Direct experience obviously is better than books. Let your own learning be active and personal, right? And learn how to filter. At 2B, we mentioned differences between the 1855 version, the amphora, that's also a part of that, the repetitions, right? Pay attention to how this works, and of course the beautiful rhythms that are established. I hope that you can get a sense of that. I mean, I really think you'll know, and some of you are reporting this already, you'll know when you're doing this job well, when you just start to read this stuff out loud. Some of you are already beginning to memorize parts of it and to recite it, and it starts to sound like the very thing he calls it, a song or a chant, right? At 3A, we have to mention Emerson's self-reliance. Go back and take a look at what we said in our earlier lectures about that. Of course, Thoreau's Walden, I read it. What about Plato's Republic, and especially Book 7 and the cave allegory? Go and find that. I mentioned that in our earlier lectures. Notice Plato just keeps coming up, eidolons, especially from the inscriptions passage, sitting looking at shadows on a wall, thinking that those are real. Plato's pedagogy and the involvement of fear and pain and the overcoming of those. And finally at 3B, we resurrected these questions, but we'll come back to it now. What is it that is the most important thing you have ever learned through direct experience, right? We mentioned Whitman out looking for frogs and bugs. right? And then finally, why is it so hard for us to listen to all sides? And can we do better at that? The way we like to say it in 303 is this debate comes up about whether it's Black Lives Matters versus All Lives Matters. Whitman would say, how about this? It's No Lives Matter. That is to say, KNOW lives matter. Listening to all sides. Respecting all sides. Making our own decision, filtering through a discussion. Whitman argues that is America. Of course, let's point out the irony. That Whitman lived through a horrific time of war. I mean, we think we're in political, tensions today. It's nothing like what Whitman lived through, and yet he still believed that humans have the capacity, Americans and the rest of the citizens of this planet have the capacity to listen to all sides and filter all of that through yourself. I hope your study, guys, we're only to the second now, moving to the third section of Song of Myself. I hope this stuff's blowing your mind. I hope it's challenging you. Thank you.